No worries. Okay, Stephanie, we are live.
Good evening, everyone. This is a hybrid meeting of the Zoning and Land Use Committee. I'm Stephanie Simone Mahaney, and we do have most of our committee members on Zoom and then several residents in person here in the district office. And tonight's meeting is going to feature a presentation from the Historic Districts Council from Frampton Tolbert. And tonight's meeting is really in response to so many questions that have been recently raised about the landmarking process. And I know these questions were perhaps spurred on by the recent announcement of Visitation Academy. But that is not tonight's meeting. We will learn about landmarking process, the 101 really, and also maybe begin to set priorities for Community District 10 and identify those sites that maybe begin to landmark. We also have with us tonight Kelly Carroll, here in person, a local Bay Ridge preservationist who has helped CB10 many times with the landmarking of 74th Street, Guardian Angel Home, Bay Ridge Parkway. Thank you very much. Before I turn it over to Frampton, I would just like to remind everyone of the protocol for these meetings. When the presentation is finished, the floor will open up to the committee for questions and comments. After that, then the public is welcome and invited to ask their own questions. So thank you. Frampton?
Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to see if I can share my screen. Hold on just a second. Just a second. See here.
Well, Frampton's Road, we also have members of the Bay Ridge Historical Society on the call. I did notice Tom McCarthy, the president. I see Jack Latorre here as well. And our chair is just joined. Recap it tonight. It's like Jane.
All right, can everyone see that and hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry, my large screen for some reason is not cooperating this evening. So I will endeavor to be able to use both screens. So thank you everybody for having me this evening. I'm Frampton Tolbert, the Executive Director of the Historic Districts Council. We are the citywide advocate for New York's historic neighborhoods. And, I did want to also, I know it already been recognized, but that tonight we also have Victoria Hoffman and Kelly Carroll, who are both members of HCC's Board of Advisors, and Kelly, former staff member of HCC, who have done so much work already in the community around preservation, both as individuals and with their work with HDC. So, and I recognize other familiar faces and names here this evening. So, as was mentioned tonight, the plan is to do a brief intro to Landmarks 101, what the landmarks designation process is. So I'll be talking about both New York City local landmarking and the National Register of Historic Places. I know some of you may already know this from past presentations and some may not. But I did first also want to just mention briefly HCC's past work in Community District 10. So let me see here if I can start my slideshow. Okay. So we work across the city with more than 500 community-based organizations to help them preserve their historically, architecturally, and culturally significant buildings and neighborhoods. And really, what is preservation? What we see it as is a conversation about our past, about our future. What is important and what parts of our past can we preserve? So in New York City, we practice that through grassroots advocacy, protecting areas of cultural and architectural significance, and landmark designation. And how can HCC help? We offer support for the landmarks designation process, the National Register process, cultural resource surveys, which I'll talk a little bit about tonight, walking tours, and other aspects of neighborhood preservation. So that we have done work previously in Community District 10. These are just a few excerpts of a reconnaissance survey that HCC had hired a consultant in 2013, and this was completed in 2014, to look at Bay Ridge specifically. And this consultant came up with a report that proposed 6 possible historic districts. Again, I think we can talk about this after the presentation and share this full report with the board again and the land use committee, as well as about a dozen individual landmarks that possibly could be considered in Bay Ridge. These are just some quick excerpts from that report. In 2012, also Bay Ridge was a 6 to Celebrate. 6 to Celebrate is HDC's program of 6 priority neighborhoods each year that we work with on their preservation priorities. And these are excerpts from our Bay Ridge walking tour brochure that we worked on with Victoria Hoffman and others in the Bay Ridge community. So the landmarks designation process, I'll go through this fairly briefly. So what is a New York City landmark? It is an individual building, district, interior, or scenic landmark that is more than 30 years old, which has been deemed an important part of New York City's heritage. It enjoys special legal protection based on that, on its value to New York City, state, and nation. And when a site is landmarked, the Landmarks Preservation Commission, which is a city agency, it's a mayoral agency, must approve in advance any alteration, reconstruction, demolition, or new construction affecting the designated site. You know, there's a lot of misinformation out there on what landmarking is and what it's not. You know, these are just a few things. Landmark designation does not control use of what the site is used for. It doesn't prevent new construction. We've seen a lot of new construction on landmark sites, additions, all sorts of, rear yard additions, rooftop additions, new buildings on the site. It doesn't control how much rent is charged to tenants of the site. It does not discourage affordable housing. We've seen actually quite a few projects where landmark sites, churches, and other institutions have built new affordable housing on their landmark site, either on vacant land or by demolishing non-contributing buildings on those sites. It does not require restoration. So landmarks does not require you to restore your building. The only reason you deal with landmarks is if you want to do work on your building, you go to the agency and apply for permits, but they do not come to you and ask you to restore your building. And it doesn't maintain specific businesses. So, if there are legacy businesses, of which I know there are many longtime businesses in Community District 10 and Community Board 10, but landmarks cannot require those businesses to stay in business or help protect them from going out of business. So generally the way that, landmarking in the city, landmark designation happens is first there's a request for evaluation, which is a formal request to the Landmarks Commission to consider a property for designation. This includes, some pretty basic information about the building as well as photos of the site. This is the way we encourage communities, and this would, encouraging Community Board 10 to submit a list of priorities to the Landmarks Commission. There are other ways that they do that. Landmarks does their own surveys of neighborhoods. They don't share that information with the public, but sometimes they also create their own priorities that they don't receive through requests for evaluation. But this is the way the community engages with landmarks to propose new landmarks. Calendaring, if the commission decides that this building is worth considering and they want to move forward in the official process, then they vote at a public meeting to calendar. So essentially they do a brief presentation on the merits of the building, and then they schedule a future public hearing where the public can come and testify on the merits of that site of whether they think it should or should not be a landmark. At this public hearing, anyone and everyone is encouraged to attend. So it's not just the property owner, it's not just the elected officials. They really encourage everyone to attend and, testify on whether this building should be a landmark. We really encourage community members to get involved in this process, and this is a good place to do that, is to testify at the public hearing. And then at a future date, the commissioners vote on designation. A majority of the commissioners were required to designate, and landmark protection begins immediately. A lot of people ask if there's a timeline for all of this, and the answer is no, there's no official timeline. When you send in a request for evaluation, landmarks will respond with a form letter that say it may merit consideration, it may not, but they don't have to move on that within a specific time period. They could move forward with calendaring it a month later, they could move forward with calendaring it 5 years later. There is no specific timeline that they are required to follow. And then briefly, there are additional steps. The City Planning Commission and the City Council do have to ratify landmarking of the landmark designation, and the mayor can veto that. This is all usually pretty pro forma, and we rarely ever see the City Council overturning a landmark designation. It does happen, but very, very, very rare. So the regulation process, what a lot of property owners want to know about landmarks. The commission can only make you do work on your building, only reviews work when changes are proposed. They have all the guidelines on their website, and permits are usually issued within 30 days. They issue tens of thousands of permits a year, usually very quickly. And all their rules are online, and if you're following their rules, you get a permit through their staff very quickly. And it's largely what you need a permit for is any restoration, alteration, reconstruction, or demolition that affects the exterior of an individual landmark or a building in a historic district. Even if it is not visible from the street, you still have to get a permit. If you're doing work on the rear of your building, you still have to get a permit for that, even if it's not visible. And then interior work, they do require permits for certain types of interior work that would impact the exterior, such as, HVAC, vents, doing that sort of thing. Or if you have an interior landmark, but there are very few interior landmarks in the city, and they have to be publicly accessible spaces. So they will not landmark the interior of your home. Those interior landmarks are largely, grand public spaces. You don't need a permit for ordinary repairs and maintenance, such as repairing window glass, repainting the exterior, doing routine maintenance. And again, you apply online, and there's a very straightforward process on the LPC website on how to get a permit to do work, and you can always talk to the LPC staff to have them help you apply to do work on your property. I think I've been through this. Is permits are generally issued within 20 to 90 days, depending on how complex the work is, and then if your work cannot be approved at staff level, if you're not following the rules, if they don't fit within the rules because you're applying for something really major, a rooftop addition, a rear yard addition, you want to do something that the commission cannot approve at staff level, it goes to a full public hearing. And that is, again, where the full commission reviews that project and decides if it is appropriate for the historic district or the individual landmark. I know I went through that very quickly, but again, I'm happy to take as many questions as possible at the end of this presentation. I did want to talk about the National Register of Historic Places, which is a state-run program, especially because I know that in Community Board 10, there have been some National Register districts, and Kelly, you could probably talk about this a little bit as well. Some blocks have been listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So a state or national register landmark is, a district site, building, structure, or object that is at least 50 years old and possesses integrity of location, design, setting, material, workmanship, feeling, and association. They're associated with significant contributions to our history, and these are other ways that these sites can be recognized on the National Register for their significance. Methods of construction, being associated with very important individual significant persons. So the difference here, I think this is an important distinction for the board to think about. So when you are a New York City landmark, that prevents demolition or inappropriate alterations because the LPC has to review those, and the LPC has binding authority on those decisions. For the National Register, If your home is on the National Register and you want to demolish it, you are able to demolish it as of right. The National Register does not protect from demolition or inappropriate alteration unless public money is being used. So for large public projects where where the government largely is doing that work, it can protect those buildings. But primarily for private property, being on the National Register does not stop those buildings from being altered or demolished if the property owner wants to do so. It is largely advisory. And one of the reasons we really encourage the National Register is because it does provide, tax credits to commercial and residential property owners within certain census tracts for restorative work on your property. So if you're doing work on your property, you can apply for these tax credits and have that money both at the state and the federal level, a certain percentage of that credited back. So it does encourage property owners to do appropriate work on their properties. So the National Register process you submit information to the State Historic Preservation Office in terms of very similar to the local landmarking. However, when you're doing a National Register nomination at the state level, the amount of information you have to provide is a lot more detailed. You have to do a lot more of the work, or you have to hire a consultant to do a lot more of that work. It's much more in depth in terms of the information they require to be able to list something on National Register. If you're submitting something for consideration to the Landmarks Preservation Commission, you can submit basic information and their staff will do the research to decide if it is appropriate to be a landmark. But for the state does not do that research. You need to provide a lot more of the documentation to do that. And then to move that forward, someone from the state will visit the site and work with the applicant to help prepare the final nomination. And maybe, I don't know, Kelly could talk a little bit about one of the nominations in Bay Ridge, if that makes sense. There's a public comment period. One thing I would also say, the difference in designating sites at the city and state level, being a historic district in New York City or being an individual landmark does not require property owner consent. The city can designate an individual property or a historic district as they see fit. They generally may not. If everyone in the proposed historic district is against that proposed designation, they would not move forward, but they do not require owner consent. The National Register, for individual sites on the National Register, it does require owner consent. And for National Register historic districts, it requires a majority consent to be on the National Register. And then I was just going to talk a little bit about financial incentives and assistance. This is more information on the tax credits that are largely through being on the National Register. So for the federal tax credit, owners of income producing properties listed on the National Register may be eligible for 20% for substantial rehabilitation of historic properties. The final dollar amount is based on the cost of the rehabilitation. And then the New York State tax credit for income producing properties, owners can receive that have received a 20% federal credit can claim a state tax credit if their property is in a qualifying census tract. Owners can receive an additional state credit of 20 to 30% of a qualified expenditure of up to $5 million. And then the homeowner tax credit offers a state income tax credit equal to 20% of the expenses you spend on repair and maintenance and upgrade of your historic home, up to $50,000 a year. There are also other organizations. The New York City Landmarks Conservancy is a nonprofit that is one of HDC's colleague organizations. They offer matching grants for sacred sites, religious institutions that want to do work or condition assessments on their historic properties. They also provide some emergency loans for immediate exterior and structural repairs for small historic properties in need. And there's some other ones here that I'm not going to go into, but I'm listing and encourage anyone, whether you are in a historic district or individual landmark or not, just in a historic building, to look at the Landmarks Conservancy's programs and see if there might be things that you were eligible for there. They offer not just for designated properties, but for historic properties. That's it. I probably went through this quite fast because that's the way I talk. But happy to answer any questions from people here, both about our work in the community board area, or about the landmark designation process. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Frampton. Before we go to questions, Kelly, would you like to say something? Do you have any information you want to share?
Yes, so there is it's not public knowledge yet. Is Lindsay Peterson by any chance in the guests?
Let me see. I can look.
Yes.
Yes.
So I won't speak for her, but Lindsay Peterson is a professional preservationist who's actually been doing some fantastic National Register work in the neighborhood. So that will come to Board 10 at a different time, but when Frampton was talking about tax credit eligibility, this is a community with significant portions that were in eligible census tracts. So if neighborhoods are interested in pursuing National Register, your property will benefit from those tax credits. And there's also maybe a bigger conversation with the bids. There's also a possibility that we could do a National Register for commercial tax credits, which could help some of the small businesses here. The only downside to that, as Frampton mentioned, is that National Register doesn't have any teeth, right? So you can tear down your house, you can tear down your building, there's nothing. So the only thing that's gonna save buildings in this neighborhood are landmarks. And I would like to point out that in Bay Ridge, we have 3 individual landmarks and we have 1 historic district. That's it. Those landmarks are the Farrell Bennett Farmhouse, Fort Hamilton, like the actual Fort Hamilton, and what everybody calls the gingerbread house, and then Doctor's Row, which is 75th Street between 4th and 5th Avenue. Everything else is up for grabs. So I wanted to encourage everyone who's in this meeting tonight to think about schools, churches, firehouses, civic buildings, blocks that you think are beautiful, and get this process going, because if you look at the landmarks map, Community Board 10, District 10 in Brooklyn is severely underrepresented in terms of landmark designation. If you look at Sunset Park, they have, I believe, 4 historic districts and a handful of individuals. And then Park Slope above that, and then, Borum Hill, Cobble Hill above that. So we really have nothing here. So I really encourage everyone tonight to think about maybe a place in the neighborhood that you would be really sad if it were to go away, and email that to Board 10, right? Because that's what's happening, and we can't keep reacting. And there's people here tonight because visitation is up for sale, and that's not what the meeting is about tonight. But in the spirit of visitation, to think about, man, like this might go away for real. And so think about what would break your heart if you were to lose it, and email Josephine.
If I can just say one more thing, that does remind me, being more proactive and less reactive. This is something that preservationists in general, really sometimes struggle with, is not realizing until it's endangered to start talking about it. But we're looking for ways to be more proactive, and one way is working more proactively with community boards. Actually, one of our other HCC staff members tonight is presenting to Community Board 12 in Manhattan. We recently did a community survey in partnership with them, asking community members what they wanted to see landmarked, and they got about 90 responses to the survey. And tonight, our staff member is presenting the findings to the community board to decide, so the community board land use committee can decide if they would like to create their list of priorities based on those responses and submit a more formal response to the Landmarks Preservation Commission.
Great, thank you. So now I'd like to just turn it to the committee. If you have any questions or comments you'd like to make, I think, Doris, you have your hand up.
Yes, I would just like to make a comment. When we first started discussing landmarking in Bay Ridge, people were very concerned that it could make any renovation they did incredibly expensive. And I know people who live in landmark houses, not in Bay Ridge, but they said when they needed to do renovations, the Landmarks Preservation Committee was cooperative and made the process very easy.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So 99% of all applications to landmarks are approved. The majority of them at staff level, which Frampton spoke about, meaning they don't have to go through a public process. They don't have to come to this board. They don't have to go to the Landmarks Commission. And having sat in Landmarks Preservation Commission hearings for a decade of my life, I can tell you that the commission endeavors to work with, not against, property owners. And that's why it is a public forum and there is a discussion. So thank you, Doris, because that's absolutely correct.
One of people's fears about landmarking.
Correct.
And one other thing I'll say related to that is we have seen also landmarks really starting to, they're really interested in finding ways to work with property owners. They're now approving routine things like solar panels on roofs and, you know, additional energy efficiency measures, replacement materials where, you know, roof tiles may be very expensive, you know, rubberized slate, you know, looking at finding ways, materials that may be prohibitively expensive for homeowners, having a list of approved replacement materials that provide the same aesthetic but may be more affordable to homeowners. They're really looking to find those kinds of things as well.
Yeah, hey, this is Tom McCarthy. I have a question for Frampton. From what thing I hear from property owners sometimes, is they're concerned about landmarking because they're afraid it will hurt the market value of their property. Can you comment on that?
You're asking about property values?
Yeah, I'm wondering, some people sometimes are concerned that landmarking of their property will affect the market value of their property.
Yeah, I mean, in our understanding, you know, the city does not do a property risk reassessment of once your property is landmarked, and property values in the city is, and as we hear, especially in Bay Ridge, you know, go up considerably regardless if you're in a historic district or not in a historic district. There is no correlation in, you know, a block away that's landmarked going up at a considerably larger, you know, being their market value being much higher than a block next door. You know, we're just, you know, that is just the nature of New York City, that property taxes are just going up in general regardless, and it has nothing to do with landmark designation.
What
Yeah,
about like individual homes that would be designated? Could it affect that?
Sorry, say that again.
An individual home, for instance, we have the gingerbread house, for example, is landmarked. If that was not landmarked, would it be worth more money than it is now? Because
I mean, I would almost say it decreases in certain ways. I mean, if it was going to do anything, it would decrease because you wouldn't be able to get the maximum, you know, tear it down and build 5 houses or build to the full extent of the property. But we also don't see that. You know, it really doesn't have an impact on. It's just being compared to similar properties within the neighborhood, regardless of not if they are landmarked to assess that value.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would like to add on to that. The first part of the question, there was the NYU Furman Center did a report on his landmarked properties in New York City versus non-landmarked ones, and it found that actually landmarking increased property values in every borough except for Manhattan. And the reason for that being is that the zoning in Manhattan can preclude high-rise development. However, which segues into the second part of the question, in Bay Ridge, where the gingerbread house is, zoning would never allow for 5 buildings to be built there. That zoning towards the water only allows for the development of very large single-family houses. And if anybody's been for a walk over there lately, that's exactly what's actually being built as new construction. Quite ugly.
Steve?
Steve, you're on mute.
Yeah.
How's that better?
Yes.
Okay. question I have is, what can be landmarked? For example, we're talking about buildings, we're talking about whole streets, but can you landmark, for example, a cobblestone street, things of that nature? And I'm just interested exactly what is subject to landmarking.
I mean, the majority of landmarks in New York City, the vast majority of landmarks are historic districts and individual buildings. There are scenic landmarks, parks, Eastern Parkway, Ocean Parkway are scenic landmarks, but I think there's only, Kelly may correct it, 11 to 13 scenic landmarks in the entire city, none in Queens. The first one in the Bronx was just done. And then interior. So there are some cobblestone streets that are protected in certain neighborhoods, like the cobblestone streets in Dumbo are part of the historic district. So when DOT wants to make changes to those streets, they have to work with the Landmarks Preservation Commission. But we have seen them, they're routinely making changes to those streets.
Okay,
Yeah.
so basically landmarking could be virtually anything if it's worth historically preserving, but you have to bring it to the Landmarks Commission. I just want to understand.
Yes, of course.
What
Yes,
the limits
yes.
are.
Yeah, but I think largely they are doing physical buildings and historic districts. That is, again, in many ways their review is aesthetic. They're not reviewing things that they can't necessarily see as significant.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question regarding the RFE and then the calendaring. If a site that I've identified for landmarking is facing sale or potential demolition, does that change the timeline?
It doesn't. I mean, we've seen landmarks move very quickly in certain cases. I believe, I wasn't here at HCC, but I believe they moved fairly quickly on Guardian Angel, even though that process ended up not being, perfect, to say the least. But, they've also will say, oh, thank you so much, we'll get back to you. And then, they kind of wait out the clock, I think, even though they would not say that. But sometimes we've seen them just not move on something. Again, as a mayoral agency, some of their priorities are set by the mayor, and they, so they may, there's not a promise that if something is endangered, that you will expect a quick response from them, I guess I'll put it that.
So being proactive does pay.
Yes. I mean, I think the more we can be proactive, because I almost think they use that as an example. They use that as an excuse that if something is endangered, then they may just let it go, not wanting to rush forward and do that in place of the things that they're already working on.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the committee? Any more? Steve, you still have your hand up, or you have another question?
I always have another question, but my hand is not up that I see.
I'm sorry. Between.
Am I allowed to click?
Yeah, wait,
I just wanted to clarify something which might help, because when we started doing the Bay Ridge Conservancy, we started trying to save the benefit of our Feldman House. It took a lot of years, but it had a little bit of a luck, because many years ago, the Bay Ridge Historical Society or somebody had mentioned it to one of the commissioners, so there was a flag on it. So it gave us a little bit of time. Unfortunately, we only saved that one building. There were two buildings and probably what we would consider 6 lots, but it was on one block and lot. So I couldn't understand why State National you could demolish, but State National comes from the owner against eminent domain, and that's why it's a little bit different. So what we did is, because people were afraid of landmarking in some cases, we had State National Register come down. Kathy Howe, she's still there. She used to actually come down. She came to Senator Street. We were looking at freestanding homes. Those are very hard to landmark in our neighborhood because they're not built by one developer, like a Dittmas Park or that. So the cul-de-sac blocks, the row house blocks are easier to get done. So we identified like all the cul-de-sac blocks, etc. We started organizing each block. We worked through original block associations, but we were not going to write the proposal for them. That was like our line. So we probably identified 10 blocks, but the 2 that got done were Senator Street. These guys wrote the proposal. And also Ovington between 3rd and 4th on State and National. The thought was we would hope that once they got comfortable, they would go to landmarking.
That's how Dr. Robinson did also.
And that was more recent. I didn't work on that. She worked
I
on
was the organizer for Doctor's Row.
But they did state and national first.
No,
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 no way.
okay.
We went right to LPC.
And I have to say that landmarking is not easy. The Green Church, which should have been landmarked. The other Methodist church, the same denomination, it's about 15 blocks down, they just got landmarked. Very nice, but not as nice as that one. Gentilly, the councilman was for it. Generally, they'll have a hearing. They wouldn't even have a hearing to force them to sit down with us. So it is very political, whoever was working against that whole process.
It's also very hard to landmark religious properties
Yeah.
because they all have dwindling congregations and their only asset is the real estate that they own. So we don't see a lot of religious designations in general. That's why,
Especially against their will.
well, yeah,
Well, sometimes some will,
yeah,
so.
Okay.
So actually, we thought it was a meeting on visitation, but that's okay. Could visitation be landmarked or it's too late for that?
So my understanding is that Councilman Brannan made a request to LPC for an initial review of landmarking. I don't know where that is, or I know there are
Yeah,
many
I
people
heard
who are
that.
interested in
Yeah.
landmarking, but that would, I
All
guess,
right.
require
Yeah.
you know, a review of LPC to determine eligibility first before a proposal would, how would that work?
so the way it would work is. It's too bad nobody ever sent in an RFE for visitation. That's step number one. I'm assuming that Justin's dialogue with LPC constitutes the equivalent of a request for evaluation because he asked the agency to evaluate the property. And LPC will come back with some type of determination. They'll either say, we're not doing it, or it may merit preservation and it meets our criteria under the law, but in our universe of priorities, this is not one of them, right? Those are usually those are the two answers.
And nobody ever approached it, all the politicians, no,
Nope.
over all these years. I don't know
all
how-
these years, so
Down there over 100
yeah,
years.
but this is why we're having this meeting because
Years maybe.
this speaks to the reactive
Interesting.
culture around preservation, especially in this community. So this is, sometimes it takes something being threatened to get people to think about what are our priorities as a community, what would we be sad to see lost.
There, everyone is talking about, they're afraid, the area here as where visitation is, that eventually, but maybe this is too soon, but eventually they're going to make it low income housing. And I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah,
without
That's
zoning.
really not in
Yeah,
our
and
purview
also
right now.
what
Right.
Frampton said is like, even if it was landmarked, like landmarking doesn't control use.
Right.
Like the Angel Guardian Home is going to be turned into a yeshiva.
Look what happened.
So like
So-
it does not have
Never
anything to
think
do
about
with
use.
use.
I just wanted to tell you ladies, and maybe you know Mary Jo Tobin.
Yeah, we thought she'll be here. She's our next door neighbor.
Well, she's gonna be on Zoom. She told me she didn't make it back from Manhattan, because I talked to her a little while ago before the
Yeah.
meeting. I got in touch, we had coffee, we put together an organization, people are starting to join. We're trying to get people involved as much as possible. We're gonna have block captains that are starting to set up around the surrounding blocks around there. I'm certainly gonna be involved. We put together a proposal, like what our vision is. We wanna try to see those block, the built environment, the inebriate's home, the convent, the school, and then also the park. There's a pond back there. I think it'd be great if they could have park or some kind of access from the back end, the other side of the street, because it's the last existing pond.
That could be an environmental problem with that pond.
Well,
If they put up housing,
right,
they can only put up housing.
but
But
the
ones on 90
Right, the zoning is- the zoning,
We just want to keep to
Yeah.
the.
topic. But anyway, there is,
All right.
well, since you know me, Joe, you know what's
I'd like
going
to put it,
It's fine.
Frampton?
I did want to say, I mean, related to visitation and other things, I do think it's probably worth the committee and the board considering submitting your own either request for evaluation or, because we don't know if the board will find out the LPC's response to the council member. And I don't think it hurts to have, also for you to submit your own letter saying, please consider this, here's the information. Because then they'll have to respond directly to you. And whether that's visitation or whether you decide as a committee that there are other sites you want to, even if we have past requests for evaluations that were submitted and never acted on, there's a new chair, they have new priorities. I will encourage working with you on submitting more requests for evaluation if the committee decides that's something that you all want to move forward with.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee?
From the public, so there are attendees in the meeting on Zoom. If you would like to ask a question, you can raise your hand using the hand raise function and we'll call upon you.
No, I'll say something.
Yeah, you're.
I'll ask you.
Oh, okay, Eric.
Okay,
Well-
third person.
Hi, Eric.
We were, part of this whole process that began when Victoria got involved, but we got a telephone call from LPC saying, have you thought about landmarking?
Oh,
This is, I'm going back almost 20 years, but then we wrote to them, we got nothing. Now, I don't know, did we submit an RFP?
Yeah,
I think we did.
It was.
It was an RFP, we got no response at all. And it's
okay.
kind of shocking because it's the only,
That's also the time
It
when they
was
had
a-
all of
it-
those
it was only-
calendared events that weren't being acted on. I mean, you were swamped over there. It's, that's why.
And another thing that was very interesting that happened that block that I think was very good for the block. Telecommunications, Bay Ridge High School was not in the district, but it was next to the district. So when they were gonna put that extension on, it made a difference in the design. They were originally gonna put a glass extension. And, you know, Gentili was involved.
concrete with glass.
No, that was the second, but they were gonna do the glass originally. And I said, how are you gonna match the materials from like 1910? They said, oh, we're not, we're putting glass and steel. I'm like, so I talked to Gentili. Then they talked
I
about
ended up
putting,
quoted in the newspaper saying monstrosity, like
yeah.
4-inch letters.
Then they talked about putting like all fake stone, you know, nothing is real, cast stone. So I'm like, we can't complain about everything. Let's see if we can see an example. They didn't have any. They went out, all they could find was banks. I'm like, this doesn't really work. We actually picked out the brick face. It almost matches seamlessly. And only because of that being next to there, even though it wasn't included. So.
It's adjacent to a historic
Yeah,
district.
so that helped us.
Had to.
Victoria, I tell that story to people all the time and they're amazed that
Yeah.
we were all brought together in that kind of
My
a
son
tight
will.
situation.
Please. So I guess I have a question then for Kelly or for Frampton. If there were RFPs that were submitted in the past, Senator Street. The
Owington.
visitation, you know, we'll use the most recently, 74th Street, which
Mhm.
was
Uh-huh.
submitted,
I did an RFP for the Ovington House.
the Ovington House.
Yes.
Um,
I wrote. the
so those are
research for
four that we
recently.
know, that had been submitted. Can we ask LPC to,
Absolutely.
I guess, what would be the language? You know, these are past submissions, you know, can you provide us an update?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay.
The only thing I would say is, Kelly, is if they have issued a official, this does not warrant, we don't think that this, we do not think this rises to the merit. If we think there's some room, a wiggle room there, but if they say this individual site is too altered, it does not merit, I have not seen them reconsider that. But if we don't have a formal decline or we think there's some wiggle room, I would encourage follow up there. And we have in our files a lot of the LPC's responses, or we could do a records access request to get response to get that information.
I think personally, there was also 76th Street, between the BQE and 6th Avenue that I worked with. Those are too soon, like those are pandemic requests, but I do think, Senator Street deserves another look. And it's easy for them, like it's a National Register district, all they have to do is like, look at that designation and write their own, and so I think the older requests definitely deserve a second look. I think the individual home on Ovington that was identified also in this report that I wrote my own research for, and a letter from HDC that you have, Frampton, that was under Meenakshi Srinivasan, so it's been a minute, right? Like Sarah Carroll might decide that we do that, but I think in addition to that, there's a lot of individual homes, some that are just Civil War era that are shockingly somehow still in this neighborhood that deserve a second look. And I think that there's, schools, firehouses, civic buildings that are city owned that could be low hanging fruit for LPC that I think this board should like really look
Cul-de-sac
at.
blocks maybe?
Yeah, the LPC currently is, they're doing a lot of schools and libraries. They just did a library in the Bronx yesterday. So I try to work with the system, not against it. And so when I see LPC is interested in landmarking city-owned buildings and they like doing one blocks, that's what I do. Because I know I have a chance.
Great, thank you.
We have some
And
hands.
I know Ann-
This is Tom, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Hold on, Anne, we have a committee member who'd like to speak. Anne?
Yeah,
Oh, now you're on mute.
You're on mute, Ann. Are you still on mute? You can hit the space bar. Sometimes that takes you right off.
No?
Oh,
No.
there she is. On the bottom. It's like Hollywood Squares. That's not Ann.
You're still on mute? Maybe we'll take Carmel. Carmel will take you while Ann is. Oh wait, Ann's that. She's
Got
there.
okay.
You're good.
Frampton, thank
Yes.
you. We really appreciate your input and your help. I want to ask a broad question, if I may. Is landmarks the only basis for preservation of green space and breathing space in dense areas? Is landmarks the only rationalization for green space retention?
Zoning issue.
No, I mean, the city can create new parks if they want to, if that's what you're asking. I mean, the city
Yeah,
can create new parks and playgrounds outside of the landmarks process, but that's something that I would say HEC does not have a whole lot of experience with, but we have seen, that certain areas of neighborhoods have been turned into new parks or playgrounds, usually initiated by a community effort working with the Parks Department and their local electeds.
Thank you.
And again, the landmarks, right? I mean, I would say it's actually harder with landmarks. They don't do a lot of scenic landmarks. They rarely are going to do a small pocket park or a playground. It's just their last scenic landmark was a portion of Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx, which was an enslaved burial ground. So I think they're looking for more cultural sites that are scenic. And I think they move very slowly on scenic landmarks, and that's not always the best route to go. It's probably better to talk with the council member and the Parks Department if there are open spaces that could be turned into more publicly accessible open spaces.
just looking for other avenues. Thank you.
This is Tom McCarthy. Can I ask a question?
Hold on a second. We have Carmelo committee comes
Oh.
first. Please. Thank you.
Sure, of course.
And then,
And that's it. And then Tom. All
okay,
right, Carmel and
Carmel?
Tom. Okay.
you're on mute.
You're on mute, Carmel.
Sorry. On the report we got today, it listed Union Church on 80th and Ridge, and that already is on the National Register.
Yeah.
Then we went through that process. I'm on the board there.
Yeah, they were.
And did you all receive any funding from the Landmarks Conservancy?
We have gotten no funding yet at that church from
Well, I'd
anyone
recommend
on that.
if you're already on the National Register to reach out to them, because that's one of their requirements, the Conservancy, to get any grants or loans from them is be on the National
Yeah,
Register.
we have a Tiffany window on the Ridge Boulevard side, and we would love some money for that, but I guess that's who we talk to.
I'll put my email in the chat. If you want to reach out, I can connect you with the head of the Sacred Sites program at the Conservancy.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Tom now.
Yeah, again, I realize this meeting isn't about the vegetation property, but it's kind of the elephant in the room. So I just like to ask Frampton a question about that. The property, I don't know if you're that familiar with it, is like a 2-block square property that's enclosed with a wall. A big chunk of it, probably more than half of it, is gardens and a pond inside. With landmarking, how would landmarking affect something like that? I mean, can
It would
garden-
depend on the landmarking of the site. As we saw at Guardian Angel, they split up the site and made the landmark designation adhere very closely to the building itself, which allowed other portions of the site to be developed, which was not ideal and something that Josephine and I have had several meetings about with landmarks, whereas other places they have landmarked the entire site, which then either they are required to maintain it as is, or if they want to build on it, they have to go through a public process to build new construction. As I was mentioning, we saw a few years ago at St. James Episcopal Church in the Bronx, they tore down their 1970s parish house to build a new affordable housing building that Landmarks had to sign off on. So that was something there where new construction was allowed, but ideally at visitation, you would want as much of the site as a comprehensive, both land, that the landscape is part of the importance of the site. So asking them to designate the entire site, not just the chapel or one other building, because they, that will not necessarily protect visitation as a whole.
That's
Yeah, that's what we asked for at the Angel Guardian Home, which is another Catholic campus that went avenue to avenue, block to block. Visitation's a little bit bigger. And Frampton as well, we monitor how landmark designations have changed and evolved over the years. Landmarks is they are increasingly only landmarking the footprint of the building. They used to landmark a tax lot. Like if you look at older landmark designations, they used to do a tax lot, which would take in the entire property. Increasingly, even on school buildings, there was a school building in the Bronx last year. They only landmarked the building footprint. So they excluded the playground area from the school site, which was part of the tax lot. They did this at Angel Guardian. They also did this at St. John the Divine in Manhattan. And St. John the Divine in Manhattan was able to then develop 2 high-rise buildings on their property. So I want to just, not to burst anyone's bubble, but landmarking is not the pathway to preserve open space on this site. If people care about the buildings that are associated with Visitation Academy, that's one issue. But the open space is a completely different issue, and landmarking is not the pathway to preserve open space. That's not why it exists as a land use tool.
Okay, thank you.
I saw someone's hand up.
Yes. Oh, Jack. Jack, you had your hand raised before?
Not there.
Yes.
There he
I'm
is.
sorry.
There-
Here I am. Hello, everyone. Hello,
Hi,
everyone.
Jack.
Hi. I'd like to ask Victoria a question. Hi, Victoria. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Do you remember you tried to, I think, landmark or get something, that little bridge overpass? I think it was on 3rd Avenue or 4th Avenue by 60.
Yes, yeah, I know what you're talking about. We went to the art commission because they were redoing the bridges and they were stone. And they used cast stone. Cast stone means fake. So we were trying to get the original bridges back. The art commission actually voted in favor, but then DOT refused, even though the art commission has a say in that. And those are those beautiful stone bridges we had. They all got, as you can see, not as nice as they were. But Jack,
Okay.
there was one other thing that was good. Brampton, you mentioned Landmarks Conservancy. There is a house in the neighborhood by Jack. I think it's on Bergen Place, maybe. It's a big white house. Francesca, remember? They got some money from, I believe, Landmarks Conservancy to do some renovations, and that was probably 20 or so years ago. So it didn't work out for them. Even though they're not designated, they were able to get some funding.
Right. They actually had a sign in front of their house, explaining how they got that grant, I guess it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm interested in understanding, maybe Frampton and Kelly could help a bit, is how other community boards have developed priority lists. This report is incredible. It is, there are just so many sites that I wasn't even aware of in the community that have just a tremendous history. I'm curious to know how other community boards have created their comprehensive list of priorities, because certainly that could be something that we could discuss as a board, as a committee, working with, does the Bay Ridge Historical Society have their own wish list? Do the Conservancy have their wish list? Items that we could talk about collectively, maybe moving forward, maybe not tonight, but moving forward. So
I just wanted to say that, to me, what seemed to be more difficult in our neighborhood, like if you have, like Sunset Park has, I think had the largest state national register of row houses at one time in the country. All like contextual blocks, and that's what makes our neighborhood a little more challenging. So like, especially the freestanding that are so different, they're not built by one developer, those are harder to get done, often they have to be really, really exceptional. So that's what I found a little frustrating and hard, because it's like you can't do 10 blocks, 5 blocks. Every block is so different in our neighborhood, so that was a little more challenging, I think, or a lot more challenging.
But nobody ever said no.
No.
Like, there's never been a request that said, like, no one's ever sent in a request.
Okay.
So yes, Bay Ridge is different, but that doesn't preclude it from anything. And over time, Landmark's standards have changed significantly. Especially in neighborhoods that don't have the parity in landmarking that other community districts have.
Right.
So nothing has all been thrown at the wall yet.
Right.
But we did, Kelly, just so you know, we did submit certain freestanding homes and they were not.
But not blocks.
No, I'm talking about, because they said that the blocks were not contact, that's what we were told.
Okay, but I would like to see a list of the freestanding homes
Sure.
that were submitted.
And also the RFEs that perhaps did not receive a response yet.
Right.
Those
Yeah.
certainly, I think we could follow up with.
Yeah, I mean, Josephine, to your point, I mean, I think part of that might be the information gathering by the board would be the first step of getting those lists, and, you know, HCC providing, here are all the RFEs that we know were submitted, Victoria's list, the list from the full report that I think you already have from the consultant from 2014, and you know, and then, you know, the board could decide, the committee could decide how then to parse that out. I mean, if there's sites on all 5 or 6 lists, then it seems like those might be, you know, the place to start. But I think information gathering may be the first step. Whether you all want to also do a community survey, it might be a good way to engage the public to say, you know, are there sites in the neighborhood? Because one thing we haven't really talked about here very much is Diker Heights, and you know, I talked with Josephine a little bit about this earlier, is that that's not somewhere that HCC has done a lot of work, but there obviously are places in Diker Heights that we may or may not know. I know there's at least one, and maybe you all know better than I do, there's at least one house on the National Register in Diker Heights, but that's just the beginning of, you know, wanting to gather information, because I think that's a neighborhood we have a lot less information on. I'm thinking this is the Saita House in Diker Heights, SAITTA, that was put on the National Register by one of the Diker Heights civic groups several years ago.
Mm,
And
a site like St. Philip's would be a similar discussion,
Right.
right?
right, you're correct. And I like the idea of community survey.
Yes.
Be interested in even seeing, I think some of the Manhattan boards have done widespread community.
Yeah, we can
survey.
share the one we just finished with CB12 in Manhattan, and Kelly and I can talk if there are other older ones. You know, I know that in the Bronx they did one with community boards through the Bronx Borough President's office. They did a large survey and issued a report and every community board issued their own list of sites. And then the Bronx Borough President then collated those.
Okay.
Yeah, and I had shared Manhattan Community Board 10s with the Land Use Committee prior to tonight. It's old, it's from 2009, but it was a priority list, and it's taken 20 years, but they've ticked a lot off of their wish list, so.
Okay. It's good to know.
Yeah.
Okay, or anything
No,
else?
I don't see any other questions.
None from the public?
No.
Okay. We can also put it up on the agenda.
No, we were just gonna talk briefly about the timeline for the
The city of
city,
Yes. Okay, and everyone else can.
yeah, I mean,
We're going ahead.
right, we'll close this portion of
Yes,
the.
okay. All right, so we have one other item on the agenda, brief item, but for everyone else, we can close this portion of the evening. I want to thank Frampton. Thank you so much for your presentation, extremely helpful.
Thank you,
Very
Frampton.
insightful, and many thanks to Kelly and Victoria for your input as well. Greatly appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Committee, please stay.
Are we all leaving?
Thank you, everyone. Oh,
Hey, by the way, you're welcome to stay. I'm gonna run. I'm
Okay, thank you, Kelly.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Okay, we're still in the meeting.
We still have to continue with our meetings. You can stay, but I don't think.
The next thing on the agenda. What is the agenda?
We're going to be covering the city of Yes, the third component of the housing opportunity. We're just discussing our timeline moving forward.
You okay?
Okay, thank you very much.
You're all-
Okay.
I have a question.
You mind?
Yes,
No.
question.
No, you can say
For you.
Oh, yeah, a question for me.
You want to say?
If I stay long, are we able to bring up the Overton thing?
Maybe we'll do a horn question.
Well, I just want them to be aware of it, the committee, because they're the ones that also spoke about that we're trying, the letter I gave you.
Wait, this is another portion of the meeting, so
Overton,
Oh, yeah.
can I stay and talk about it again? or
Yeah,
no?
say, we'll talk about it offline.
If not, I'll go
Yes,
home. I wanted them to.
Okay. So, Justin, you have a present,
Yeah, no, I just
Slides.
have a few slides for the committee members.
okay.
I know most have gone off the call, but the City of Housing Opportunity is coming next, as we know. There's a few proposals that DCP provided an overview of slides, creating a universal affordability preference, eliminating costly parking mandates, enable modest apartment buildings, help owners, giving them flexibility to create a small access dwelling unit. And they provided some opportunities for the public to participate in different info sessions. So there was just one very recently at the end of February on conversion, small and shared apartments. There will be the next one, missing middle housing, on March 27th. There will be an overview of the entire proposal on Wednesday, April 17th, and these links are available on the Department of City Planning's website. And it's my understanding from City Planning that certification is expected the end of April, which means it would be referred to community boards the end of April. And 60 days from there would be June for community board review. Nothing is final, but that's kind of the rough estimate of the schedule. So I think that in talking to Stephanie about the economic opportunity text amendment, which was adopted today by the Department of City Planning, there were some minor changes that were made to it. It's now working its way to the City Council. We wanted to speak as a committee to tonight to see how we'd like to proceed with preparing for that certification or referral to the community boards. And some of the ideas, as we've done in the past, is sharing the links to the info sessions. But perhaps, you know, Stephanie and I were speaking about maybe viewing those together as a committee to begin to formulate questions and areas of interest in advance of referral might be a good way to begin our preparation in review for this text amendment. Because the last economic opportunity felt very overwhelming. And part and parcel was we didn't receive the text until shortly before certification, and it grew from, was it 600 pages to 1,100 pages. And I don't know when the text will be released for housing opportunity.
Would it not be released at the end of April?
It would definitely be released the end of
Okay.
April. I don't know if there'll be
If
an
they'll
advance,
pre-release
a
it.
pre-release as they did in economic
Can we
opportunity.
request that?
We could request that, yes.
You know, sort of be proactive about it, make that request. And then it just means that if we could view those presentations together, there was a lot of redundancy, at least on my part, when we went through the analyses of the last component of economic opportunity. And I just would like to be more methodical this time. It was very overwhelming, and I'm hoping to save us from having to have 13 meetings again.
I think it's a great idea to do it together.
Fantastic
Great
idea.
idea.
Okay, wonderful.
I agree, it's an excellent idea.
Thank you, Josephine.
We
Okay,
work
so
well together. And we learn from one another.
So, so we're in March, and I think the ends of, later this month, we're looking at some dates.
yes, it's for the next.
For the next zoning and land use committee meeting.
That's on me. I'm trying to work out my schedule, but yes.
And we will look at, beginning that review by playing the info sessions and coming and working on creating some questions together based on information provided within those info sessions. And in doing so, we'll have the ability to stop, to pause, to, you know, do screenshots, to jot down thoughts. And while a committee meeting, it will also be the beginning of our working group to begin our review. So we're not crunched. The June board meeting is the third Monday of June. So that, you know, then we begin the summer hiatus so that we won't be able to, you know, I don't know if the time, you know, how the timing will work. It really will depend on when the release is and when the clock starts and if there will be additional time. I don't know when the CPC will be reviewing it. There was some more months that were provided to community boards after we did do that letter.
Yes.
We'll probably know more within the next few weeks as we get closer in to find out when CPC is planning to release refer it to us.
Yes. So, I mean, if we're agreed, I will get a date for the next committee meeting. Steve, you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to review something. I'm a little bit confused here. You know, the mayor put out a whole thing today that I think you sent to us, and I appreciated that. Each of the city of tranches, let's put it that way. You know, I thought they were supposed to interact, right? That, you know, as one thing. And now I'm beginning to understand that each one of them is voted on and then it is enacted by the city council. So that by the time we get to the next one, the first three tranches or whatever they are already in law. Is that correct?
Well, the first one is the first carbon neutrality was passed. The second, the economic opportunity was voted upon by the council and the city planning commission and referred to the city council. They have, I believe, 2 months or so to review, make their own recommendations, have a public hearing, and make changes. I'm not
Right. But what I'm trying to understand then is that if you take the first one, they enacted that into law. Okay, the one with the environmental one, right? Am I correct?
Yes, it's the text is
That's in
amendment.
law. And now,
Right.
now the next one, you know, economic opportunity, that's the second one. Once they pass that, that's in law, right?
Right, the text was amended because the text
Right,
changed,
and
yes.
but then we have more that are coming after this, and each one of them stands independently, yet it's being represented to us, and I'm a little bit confused by that. I was of the impression, believe me, it's probably my misreading of it, but I was of the impression that all of these things would kind of be voted on and then work together. In other words, once the city council passes it, those first two are in law, and if it conflicts with anything that comes after it, you can't change it. Is that correct?
That's how it appears.
Yes, I believe you're
Yeah.
right.
I
Part
thought
of-
they were supposed to work like chapters in a book, not separate books. And, you know, and then at the end, they would pass the book, say, okay, we've read the whole book and we all agree on that book. But, so each one of these is separate. And
Yes.
that,
That was one of the concerns that we would not be able to address the cumulative effects of
right,
each
of
component.
each of these things, right?
They would already be implemented, and then now we have the third one that will interact with the other two. With
That's
no
right,
re-
correct. But the other two will already be implemented by the time we finish this, and they'll already be building whatever they're gonna build, et cetera, et cetera. It just seems to me that the whole thing is being sold as something that it's not. And I think it's just something I wanted to make an observation about. I think it's wrong.
Thank you, Steve. Okay.
Okay, yeah,
Okay.
question?
No,
Oh,
no,
okay.
no. We're gonna call them now.
Nice
Thank
to
you.
see you guys.
Nice to see you here. Good seeing you.
Bye.
Okay.
Your reason, bye.
That's not mine.
Oh, did you have medicine?
No.
I think we'll talk to you. Offline, yeah. Right, okay.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time this evening, and when a date is set for the next meeting, we will let you know. And I hope you all have a very good evening.
Thank you.
Thank